I'm actually delighted to welcome the New Hampshire ACLU here. Devon's boyfriend, dragged her up to PorcFest last year, and she actually had a pretty good time. So I think we're building more and more bridges. So Devon Chaffee from NHCLU.
I just want to clarify, first, thank you so much for having us all here. Carla, thank you so much for that introduction. But I do want to clarify that it was I that dragged my husband up to PorcFest, not the other way around. So I am so excited to be here at the Liberty Forum because I did have a fantastic time just walking around PorcFest, talking to individuals, and having just fascinating conversations. And since that event, I have had the pleasure of working with people from the Free State Project on tons of issues that are very high priorities for the ACLU here in New Hampshire. As Carla said, I'm the executive director of the New Hampshire office of the ACLU, and we have gotten to work with Free Staters on everything from continuing the ban of law enforcement use of license plate scanners, which was a fantastic win in the House, as well as marijuana legalization and stopping police militarization in our state. And so I would have been excited to have been here anyways, regardless. But when Carla contacted me to moderate this panel, I was just amazed at the people that she had organized to come here and talk about whistleblowers today. So I'm completely honored to be here today with our panelists. We are incredibly lucky to have with us today not only a number of panelists who are experts on whistleblower advocacy and on defending freedoms of the press, but who also have personal experiences and standing up and calling out government abuse and really putting themselves on the line. And so I'm so looking forward to not only benefiting from their expertise in this area, but also hearing about their personal stories and the sacrifices that they've made. And so I'm just going to give a quick introduction. I think you probably have all of their bios in your materials, but their backgrounds are so interesting. I do want to give a little bit of background. So to start off, we have Jesselyn Radack, who is the National Security and Human Rights Director at the Government Accountability Project. The Government Accountability Project, or GAP, is the leading advocate for whistleblowers in the nation. I just moved to New Hampshire a year ago. Before that, I was in Washington, D.C., working on national security issues. And when people would call our office and want to share with us information, but they were concerned about what the consequences might be for them, we would send them to GAP immediately, because we know that they were the people who were experts and who whistleblowers would be in good legal hands and get the defense that they really needed. Ms. Radack works with whistleblowers from the national security and intelligence communities, including the NSA, the Defense Department, and the Department of Homeland Security. She previously served as the legal ethic advisor to the Department of Justice. And she's also author of her memoir, Traitor, The Whistleblower and the American Taliban, and she's a graduate of Brown University and Yale Law School. Next, we have Trevor Timm, who is co-founder and executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which supports and funds independent journalism organizations dedicated to transparency and accountability in government. And he'll give us a little background, I'm sure, on how he started and why he started that organization. He's also an activist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is based in San Francisco, which does amazing work with regards to defending electronic privacies and freedoms. There he specialized in surveillance, free speech, and government transparency issues. He also won the 2013 Hugh Hefner First Amendment Award for Journalism. And finally, we have Thomas Drake, who is a decorated United States Air Force and U.S. Navy veteran, a former senior executive of the U.S. NSA, and a whistleblower. In 2000. Mr. Drake is also the 2011 recipient of the Ridenhour Prize for Truth-Telling, as well as co-recipient with Ms. Radack of the Sam Adams Associate for Integrity and Intelligence Award and the 2012 Hugh Hefner First Amendment Award. So we have just very distinguished panelists here today to talk to you about the importance of whistleblower work in this country and its effect on the freedom of the press. And so I think we're going to start with a media clip of, here are we, is this ready to go? Do you want to introduce it? Mr. Drake, do you want to introduce the clip?
Yeah, 6 August 2012, Jesselyn Radack and myself were interviewed by Jason Jones, the senior correspondent with The Daily Show. And it's a real satirical take. It's called A Leak of Their Own.
We're having technical difficulties. I'm going to ask our panelists to kick us off by just giving us some of their personal background as to what brought them to whistleblower advocacy, why they personally came to work in this area, and why it's so important to them.
Hi, I'm Jesselyn Radack with the Government Accountability Project. My circuitous route to my job, people are like, how did you get into this whole whistleblowing thing? And it was because I myself was a whistleblower right after 9/11. During the George W. Bush administration, I had been the ethics advisor at the Justice Department who advised not to interrogate the quote-unquote American Taliban, John Walker Lind, without his attorney, and parenthetically not to torture him. Unfortunately, the government did both, and I advised not to use that in a criminal prosecution, which is, of course, exactly what the government did. I did not blow the whistle on a number of occasions when the Attorney General bragged about having provided him counsel and having treated him carefully and scrupulously regarding his rights, when obviously trophy photos of this guy were circulating around the world, bound up, gagged, and blindfolded and bound to a board. But I didn't blow the whistle until I found out that there was a federal court order for all of the Justice Department's correspondence related to the Lind interrogation. And the file with all of my emails regarding that had been purged. So as one of those crazy 29-year-olds, I called technical support and resurrected more than a dozen of the missing emails, wrote a memo to my boss attaching the emails, took home a copy in case they disappeared again, and resigned. I thought my ordeal had ended at that point, but unfortunately not, because the criminal trial continued, and it became perfectly evident that my emails had not been turned over to the court in accordance with its order. And for me personally, regardless of what you think of John Walker Lind, I couldn't live with it on my conscience that someone could be put to death because of what I knew. So I ended up giving copies of the emails to the media, which wrote a story that basically collapsed the John Walker Lind case. And again, I thought my ordeal was over. But for doing that, I ended up being put under one of the first federal criminal leak investigations in this country, referred to the state bars where I'm licensed as an attorney, and put on the no-fly list. Obviously, this was retaliation for having blown the whistle, and it has lived with me for the last 10 years until this past summer when the DC bar complaint got dismissed after more than a decade. After that, I decided I was going to dedicate my life to representing whistleblowers. And I ended up working for Alan Grayson, representing defense contractors alleging reconstruction fraud in Iraq. He got elected to Congress. I needed a job. And so I went to the Government Accountability Project to start their National Security and Human Rights Program. I thought I would be dealing with whistleblowers who were being demoted or having their security clearances pulled or even getting fired. But instead, I heard that this guy, Thomas Drake, had been indicted under the Espionage Act, of all things, for revealing fraud, waste, and abuse at the NSA. And I knew at that point we had crossed the Rubicon, because for all the stuff I had to go through, at least I never got indicted. And he did. And we fought that case and ultimately won. But I thought this one weird off with Tom Drake would not repeat itself after the case collapsed in such spectacular fashion. But unfortunately, the Obama administration has brought some 8 prosecutions against national security and intelligence leakers who are really whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, more so than any president ever, and then all presidents combined. One of the first people where the Espionage Act was used against him for non-spy purposes was Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower. Yet the Obama administration has seized on this and unfortunately taken my work in a very different direction than I ever expected. So that's how I got into my line of work.
So hi, my name is Trevor Tim. I'm the director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, and I think I started getting into this issue around 2010. I had just graduated law school and was working on a book with the former lawyer for the New York Times during the Pentagon Papers case. His name was James Goodale. I was helping him write his memoirs. It was a lot about the First Amendment and how for 40 years newspapers had reshaped how the courts see the freedom of the press. And around April 2010, an organization no one had heard of called WikiLeaks released a video showing soldiers killing unarmed civilians and 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq. And this was the start of, a year-long release of classified material by the from the United States government by WikiLeaks. And all of a sudden we had people all over television claiming that WikiLeaks should be prosecuted, and that Julian Assange was breaking the Espionage Act and he belonged in jail. And we had learned 40 years ago from the Pentagon Papers case that actually this was protected by the First Amendment. This was exactly what the Freedom of the Press Clause was first established for, to publish information that's in the public interest that the government does not want you to know. And I started writing about this frequently. I ended up at the Electronic Frontier Foundation working as a legal activist writing about surveillance and free speech. And so around this same time, the government did something interesting. They knew that they couldn't censor WikiLeaks because of the Pentagon Papers case 40 years ago. And so what they ended up doing was instead of going to court to get a court order, they decided to a couple officials unofficially pressured Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal to cut off donations to WikiLeaks. So to essentially censor them by financial strangulation. And Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal take up 95% of all of the payment processing in the US, at least back then. And we thought this was a real injustice at EFF. You know, they would have been laughed out of court if they went to this to a judge, but instead they were able to get away with it because it was this unofficial censorship. So we had this idea of starting a new organization to not only take donations to WikiLeaks, but also to take donations to a bunch of other independent, innovative journalism organizations that were doing great work around transparency and government secrecy. Because, you know, in the 2 years since WikiLeaks had become front page news, it was evident that government secrecy was still at an all-time high. You know, in 2012, I think the number is 93 or 94 million pages of classified information went through the U.S. government, which was an all-time high, which the year before it was an all-time high, and then going back 10 years before that, it had just been a slow rise. And so, you know, this was a giant problem that needed many solutions, not just one, not just WikiLeaks. And so we formed our organization about 1.5 years ago. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblowers, one of our co-founders, and 2 of our other founding board members were Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. And about 2 months after we officially launched our organization, a then unknown person named Edward Snowden started contacting them through encrypted channels. And after a few months, of course, in June 5th, 2013, The Guardian published the first of the Edward Snowden stories that showed that the NSA was collecting every single phone record, virtually every single phone record in the United States, you know, billions and billions and billions a year. And, you know, this was exactly the type of journalism that we had been advocating for, that, you know, journalist organizations shouldn't be towing the government line. They shouldn't be self-censoring themselves like they did in 2005 when the first NSA scandal came out. And here we had 2 of our original board members being the recipients of this information. And actually just last month, Edward Snowden officially joined Daniel Ellsberg on our board of directors. You know, the whistleblower that kind of made whistleblowing in the United States a legitimate avenue to get information to the public, and then the most famous whistleblower that we've seen in quite some time. And you know, it's been an amazing experience seeing the way that the public has reacted to Edward Snowden, and now has, you know, shown light on everything that Tom Drake and others have been saying for years about the NSA and how they have really trampled over the Fourth Amendment and all of our privacy rights. And so we can get into a bunch more later. You know, we have a technology project that's helping hopefully future whistleblowers leak to media organizations, and we can talk about all of the problems that have happened in the past 6 or 7 years that have allowed the government to, as Jesselyn said, prosecute more whistleblowers than all administrations combined. So with that, I can hand it off to Tom.
I'll begin with the beginning. I took an oath. That oath was an idea of how to govern ourselves. It launched a grand experiment over 220 years ago. I took that oath 4 times. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. I did not take an oath to the President. I did not take an oath to NSA. I did not take an oath to secrecy. I didn't take an oath to wrongdoing or illegality. And the last thing I was going to do is take an oath to overturn the Constitution. My first day on the job was 9/11. And what I was eyewitness to in those days and weeks after 9/11 set the tone and tenor for everything else that happened afterwards. That's well over 12 years ago now. And what was I eyewitness to? In the deepest of secrecy, the White House unchained itself from the Constitution. And in partnership with NSA, decided to create a mass surveillance program that the country, and it turns out the world, had never seen. Turning the United States of America into a foreign nation for the purpose of dragnet electronic surveillance on a scale that is still not, and I'm going to repeat again from this stage, but in spite of everything that I and others have said, has still not been fully revealed. Our country has been taken over by an alien form of government. And remember, the oath that I took was to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What happens when your own government becomes the enemy? What happens when your own government regards the Constitution as just a piece of paper? And because 9/11 was such a huge failure, it said, you know what? We're just going to set it aside. It's in the way. And I would not stand by. I said, if I remain silent, then I am complicit in a crime against America. If I remain silent, I am an accessory to the subversion of the Constitution I took an oath to support and defend. And I vowed then, and I continue to vow for years afterwards, and continue to vow even after I went to the press, that I would support and defend the idea of how we govern ourselves. And I did not want to see that grand experiment end. And so I blew every whistle that existed. And what was I eyewitness to? Secret surveillance, massive fraud, waste, and abuse, an extraordinary redistribution of wealth from the United States into the military, industrial, intelligence, congressional, cybersecurity complex. Sold out national security to the highest bidder. What else was I present to? And once again, it's extremely present to the reality of what could have been. NSA had critical intelligence that it did not properly share with those who could have taken action to prevent 9/11. Think about it. None of this ever had to happen. None of it. The very best of American ingenuity and innovation was never put into the fight. Never. Already knew who the threat was, could have continued to protect the Fourth Amendment, and provided superior intelligence. Because see, you have to remember the Constitution, in the preamble, after we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, it says there's two primary responsibilities of government: provide for the common defense and the general welfare, and utterly failed on providing for the common defense. Except my actions were criminalized under the First Amendment. The First Amendment was a threat to the government. At one point, I faced the rest of my life in prison. That's what I was threatened with, unless I cooperated with the authorities. Do you know what it means to sit here in front of you, especially here, and I'm going to indulge you here for a couple of minutes in your own history, to be free? Do you know what it means to really be free? When the government threw everything they had at you to take your freedoms and liberties and rights away, and put you away as long as they could. What does freedom really mean? The sovereignty of who you are as a human being. So walk me back right now to the future. Walk with me back to your own future, because you're making history here. I've been extraordinarily present to the history you're making here for the last 3 days. There is a new social revolution going on right here. It is a new paradigm, and it's emerging from your own created future. It's growing new roots and shoots from the tree of liberty right here in New Hampshire. But if my example sets the mark, then just indulge me for a minute. Think of New Hampshire as a colony, and DC is the authority issuing orders to the governor of New Hampshire about the status of the Free State Project citizens here in New Hampshire. Just think about that for a minute. So, having said that, who do you think America's first whistleblower was? Because the pre-revolutionary period is uncannily similar to what's going on right here, right now in this country, in this state. Benjamin Franklin. Did you know he was America's first whistleblower? Wow. He leaked, sound familiar? Secret documents to the press. Why? To help ease tensions between the crown and the colonists. But his noble intentions, whistleblowing, backfired. You know why? We forget our own history here, folks. He had lived for 15 years on Craven Road in London. 15 years. Guess what? He was a deputy postmaster general of the American colonials. He obviously, at this point, was one of the most famous men in the world. Remember, he didn't invent lightning for nothing. And as the Deputy Postmaster General of the Royal Post in the American colonies, he had substantially improved the delivery of mail. But he had been troubled by what was going on in the colonies. And we have to remember the Stamp Act of 1765. You have to remember the landing of the British redcoats in Boston in 1768 and the so-called Boston Massacre in 1770, not too far from here. And he was really worried about what was clearly a tinderbox. Well, guess what? There was a governor of Massachusetts called Thomas Hutchinson who had some interesting things to say. And Benjamin Franklin intercepted some letters that went to the governor. Guess what? Amongst these letters was stated by the governor of Massachusetts. These were incriminating letters. And he sent these letters to the head of the General Assembly in Massachusetts, a Thomas Cushing. Keep them secret. Don't reveal who gave them to you. Because there was a particular phrase, I'm going to quote that phrase to you, just to set the history here and why this is so crucial to expose something in the public interest. Because this disclosure by Franklin set in motion critical events that led to the American Revolution. In that letter was a soundbite heard round the world. Hutchinson, the governor, referring to his fellow colonists, said, quote, "There must be an abridgment for the colonists of what are called English liberties." An abridgment. So guess, these letters don't remain secret. They were given to who? Samuel and John Adams. And it got published in every paper that existed. Benjamin Franklin's identity was kept secret, and speculation was running rampant and in the Crown as to who that source was. Long story short, Franklin is pulled before the Privy Council in London. The Privy Council. Because he actually admitted, he finally, after many, many months of speculation, said, I was the one. I was the one. Sound familiar to a particular whistleblower represented by Jesselyn Radack, who disclosed who he was against the advice of the very journalists that he had given papers to. So he received this summons. And all he thought is he's going to be defending, okay, because there were some petitions that have been flying around about removing the governor. But that's not what happened. He arrived, and the chief prosecutor decided to character assassinate Franklin. Franklin had the good sense, right? He had already acquired, because they had delayed this, he had acquired an attorney. And guess what he was attacked for doing? Guess what he was attacked for doing? Illegally receiving and disclosing private correspondence. So he said, no, I didn't. Had his attorney, they came back, and he said, I did this in the public interest. This was communication with public officials. It's in the public interest. Made an extraordinarily powerful case. But guess what happened to him? He was fired as the Postmaster General, received his pink slip. And going from a mediator in the space of less than an hour, he became a rebel with a cause. I share this with you, given the enormity of what I faced after 9/11. And just like Benjamin Franklin, I chose not to remain silent with the secret information that I was now aware of. I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Tom, for really putting this whole conversation into a historical perspective of the incredibly important role that whistleblowers, as you said, acting in the public interest, have played throughout our history, and the continuing important role that they should play, but I think the panelists have really highlighted how whistleblowers are increasingly under threat in a way perhaps that they have never been, facing retaliation that is more severe than they have ever perhaps faced in the past. And so what I'd love to ask our panelists to talk a bit about is, why are we seeing this increased attack? Why are we seeing these increased prosecutions using the Espionage Act in the way that we are in the past couple of years? Is it due to a simple change in policy because of the Obama administration's decision? Is it due to the fact that there are more leaks happening, more whistleblowers courageously coming out? Or is it due to an increase in secrecy that we've heard discussed a bit on the panel? Is it simply that the government is engaging in more abuses that are being hidden by the public, and that's why we're seeing more of these prosecutions? I'd just be curious to hear what is the source of these increased retaliations against whistleblowers, and what impact is it having on the press?
For me, I think since 9/11, Bush at that point put in a secrecy regime after 9/11, and I felt like during the Bush years post 9/11, the pendulum swung to the right. I think I'm moving my hand to the right for you guys. And which is not unusual during a period of a national security crisis. We've done a lot of sort of crazy stuff with the Alien and Sedition Acts and with interning Japanese people. We tend to overreact after a national security crisis. I get that, but after, I mean, we're how many years into this? 14, 13 years into it. Instead of, as he promised, Obama, instead of reining in that regime and getting the pendulum back to some point of equipoise, it swung even further. And overclassification under Obama during his first year tripled what Bush had done in 7 years of his presidency. And I think the extraordinary secrecy and classification, and believe me, pretty much anything these days can get stamped classified. You would be surprised to see a Christmas card from NSA stamped classified, or a baby announcement stamped classified. But I have seen all these things. I have dealt with defending clients where words like fiber optic are classified. Words like Mogadishu are classified. Things that are clearly known to the entire planet are deemed classified by the government, and damn it, if reality knows exactly what it is, it doesn't matter if the government has labeled it classified. It is still, according to the government, a secret that you can be prosecuted for divulging. So the war on whistleblowers, I think, is one side of the same coin of overclassification. This crackdown, I see it more as a crackdown on information. It's a war on whistleblowers, it's a war on hacktivists, it's a war on journalists, and it's a war more broadly on information. And then that dovetails with the technological aspect, which has made it both easier for people to blow the whistle, and we've seen examples of mass digital whistleblowing by both Chelsea Manning and by Edward Snowden, but it has also made it easier to catch whistleblowers. And I know I'm probably about to steal one of Trevor's talking points, so before doing that, I'll just go ahead and pass it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference between now and previous administrations is technology. I mean, overclassification is a huge problem, and it has been going up incredibly high in the past decade. But you have to remember, you know, there have been leaks of classified information that have been on the front pages of newspapers for 50, 60 years, like every day. You know, part of the reason they won the Pentagon Papers case 45 years ago was because their Washington bureau chief wrote a long affidavit to the judge describing all of the times that presidents and heads of departments and senators and congressmen had told him classified information for the purpose of printing it. And it has been standard practice in American journalism for as long as we can count. And you know, the problem is that, you know, for 40 years, journalists defended their sources in court by refusing to testify against them. So even when they lost the Supreme Court case that didn't say that they had reporters' privilege, you know, guaranteed to them by the First Amendment, they decided that they would violate judges' orders instead of giving up their sources and go to jail. So this created a huge problem for prosecutors. So they would be sending reporters to jail rather than sources, and they realized that they would have a 3-year legal fight on their hands if they ever tried to subpoena a reporter. So it was just really hard. It was just really hard for them to prosecute sources, and until they realized probably 6 or 8 years ago that they actually don't need the reporters to testify against them anymore. They now can use technology against these sources. So that means that they can go to third-party email providers to subpoena emails, to subpoena phone call records. And mind you, the journalists and the source don't ever know that the subpoena is happening until it's too late. So that means that the government has all the records of their phone conversations, their emails, every time that they've made plans to visit in person, and there's no way of challenging it. And so, you know, in the past 6 years, there's been 8 whistleblower prosecutions under the Espionage Act. Before that, there was 3 in our entire history. And all but one of those cases, they didn't even bother calling the reporter to testify. They didn't even bother trying. And in the one case they did, it's it's actually one of the most famous reporters in the country, James Risen, who uncovered the first NSA scandal, warrantless wiretapping under George Bush. And a lot of people think that he is being subpoenaed not because they need his testimony, but just for retribution. And so we've come to a point where we have to change tactics and how we, as journalists, protect sources. You know, you can't just refuse to testify anymore. You actually have to move over a step and protect your conversations to begin with. You have to figure out a way to make sure that this long metadata trail isn't accessible to the government, that you're using encryption if you're talking online, that you're doubling back and being extra careful about how you are communicating, because everything you say at this point could potentially be used against your source. You know, there are a couple reporters for the New York Times who every single government official that they've emailed in the White House are now under investigation for leaking classified information. And, you know, reporters talk to government officials all the time. You know, it's not a crime to talk to a reporter, yet it's turning into one by fiat, because all of these government officials, even if they've never even come close to leaking classified information, you know, are being questioned, have to get a lawyer, potentially having their being fired and having their lives ruined because they talk to a reporter. And this is a direct result of all of this mass surveillance. And so really the next step in the next few years, you know, Edward Snowden has really shown a light on this mass surveillance. He's also shown reporters that they need to start using encryption. You know, he went to Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras because they understood how to use it. Actually, in fact, Glenn almost lost the story. You know, he tells the story now that it was so annoying to set up an email encryption that he almost didn't do it. And so the only reason Snowden went to Laura Poitras was because she, or one of the only reasons, was because she knew how to use it. And so that's the kind of techniques that we have to start teaching journalists, but also just teaching everyday internet users, because you know, we all face some of the same problems with our privacy. You know, it's heightened for them because there are always government prosecutors looking to go after them, but in a lot of sense, we all face the same problems they do now. And so, you know, hopefully we can figure out a way to move forward to teach people how to do this in a way that's safe and secure.
Yeah, I'll just use really strong language. Look, it's pathological. The bottom line is the government's out of control, right? The government's not adhering to the law of the land. And so anything that's private, anything that's sovereign, any individual is exercising their free will as a citizen, right, is considered a clear and present danger in some form. I've said this before, I'll say it again. We're all foreigners as far as the central government is concerned. And so what do you have to do? You got to defend who you are as a sovereign human being, as a sovereign citizen. And the reality of it is, it's extraordinarily dangerous in today's environment to hold up a mirror or speak truth to or of power. I'm exhibit number one. So if the government considers the First Amendment to be a clear and compelling danger to the continuance and growth of the national security state, then what does it say for the rest of us? I mean, this is what's at stake for us. It's our ability to be sovereign. It's our ability to exercise and have our protections as citizens, not subject to the state. That's the reality. And I continue to ask my friends and colleagues, and in spite of even the Snowden disclosures, what is it going to take for America to wake up? And I have a lot of people say it's too late, Tom, they've already taken over, so why are you even bothering doing this? Why do you fly around and go to various conferences and panel sessions, and why are you flying up to New Hampshire? Don't you know it's all over? Really?
Just beginning, honey.
Exactly. Because you're taking action. You're not just talking about it. You're not just sitting here saying, oh, woe is me, it's someone else's fault, or I'll wait for some gilded person showing up on a white horse. You're actually taking direct action, because that's the only difference it's going to make. And you're not just taking it for yourselves, you're taking a relationship with each other, because you know that this is much bigger than just yourselves. You have to create communities here. You have to create relationships with others, because this is what's at stake. I don't want to see the grand experiment live, but I recognize there's many different ways in which you can exercise your sovereignty. There's many different ways to exercise who you are as free human beings. All I can tell you is when you spend many years under the jackboot of the government doing everything it can to snuff out your life and destroy it in the meantime, you get really focused on what matters in life. And that's why I've dedicated the rest of my life to defending life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because that is at the core of the human experience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I do want to take a moment to recognize that it isn't as if the Free State Project is a stranger to being targeted because of the activism and the work that they do and the way that they have put themselves out there. They recently found themselves cited inexplicably as being, given the fact that they're a completely nonviolent organization, as they found themselves being cited as a terrorist threat in an application for a militarized vehicle to the Department of Homeland Security, something that the ACLU found through a right to know request. And so it's certainly, the Free State Project is no stranger to having being targeted for being up there and for standing up for their principles and for what they think their society should look like. I do want to get back and talk a little bit more about the case of Edward Snowden, because while I think that most of the people in this room have probably given quite a bit of thought to the importance of their privacy and how their privacy every day is being encroached upon by our government, I think that most of America probably doesn't give it that much thought. And yet the Snowden case seems to have really captured the American public. And I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts about why that is. Why has this case really had an impact? Has it had an impact? How, and why has it had an impact? And what is the example that is set by the Snowden case for future whistleblowers down the road?
Well, I think the example set by Snowden shows how broken the whistleblower system is in the United States. The fact that he did the only thing he reasonably could do after carefully studying Tom Drake's case, after carefully studying Bill Binney's case and Bradley Manning and John Kiriakou and what all these people who did try to go through channels of one sort or another, or in Tom's case, through every conceivable channel, and how that utterly failed. Not only did it not redress the problem, but they ended up being prosecuted for espionage anyway. You know, and while the administration and high-level officials in the executive branch constantly decry people who take it upon themselves to go and do something this audacious, the administration knows very well that if it really wanted to solve the problem of leaking, all it has to do is enact meaningful and effective whistleblower protection legislation. But it does not. In fact, it specifically continues to exclude national security and intelligence employees from that protection. And almost every single law has a huge national security, except for national security. I mean, the law will sound great. You know, the government can't do X, Y, and Z. Oh, unless national security is involved, which is pretty much anything. You can name pretty much anything, and I can later on draw and explain to you how a porcupine is related to national security. So I think the Snowden case has had a huge effect also because it unearthed NSA for no such agency and never say anything. NSA is now a household name and everybody's talking about it. You go to the shopping mall and you hear people talking about it. You go to the grocery store or the gym or wherever and you hear people talking about it in everyday life. So that's been another incredibly positive effect that these programs are being revealed. In terms of public opinion, when I started working on this case in July, I mean, it was much like the feeling with Tom Drake. Like, you have to literally turn the Titanic of public opinion, which is everybody not liking your client or actively hating your client. But from where we were in June, where the majority of Americans disapproved of what Snowden did, now those numbers are reversed, and some 60 to 65% of Americans approve of what Snowden did, think NSA did something wrong, and are thinking about how to change their own habits. I still think people aren't worried enough. I mean, in Jeff's world, people should be marching in the streets over this. And they're not. And I think if we lived in a different decade, people would be marching in the streets over this. But people are starting to encrypt. I think it's frankly irresponsible if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a journalist or an accountant not to be encrypting communications with your clients, because there is not a carve-out by the NSA metadata bulk collection program respecting these categories of communication. So I think as encryption is made easier and more available to people, people are fighting back. And even if you're not encrypting, there are minor little things you can do to protest the state of affairs. Every time, make part of your signature line when you sign an email, put in something that says, this communication may be collected and stored, or is being collected and stored without consent in secret by the National Security Agency. So that whoever you send it to gets that. I mean, there's so many little things, even if you may just be a hermit and live alone and not need to encrypt for some reason. But there are other ways you can make it known that this is an infringement on your space and your words, your email, your texts, your phone calls. And it goes beyond that joke of, hi, Mom, and whoever else is listening on the line here, to actually taking steps to put it out there, and people will think twice when they read your email signature and like, whoa, wow, really? Why would they care about having this email about, my kid's shoe sizes or whatever? But that is not to minimize the importance of encryption, and it's long overdue, and I think that's probably one of the biggest gifts Snowden has given to us, is that to maintain, before we completely lose internet freedom, he has given the wake-up call that we need to really fight harder than ever for it, because it's completely under assault, not only through the Espionage Act, but a number of really draconian computer crimes like CISPA. And you'll hear more about that later.
So I can talk about the impact of Edward Snowden through two legal cases that happened shortly before he went public in June of 2013. So the first one was by the ACLU. The ACLU has been trying to challenge what's known as the FISA Amendments Act, which passed in 2008. This basically legalized the warrantless surveillance that was revealed in 2005 and 2006 under the Bush administration. And the ACLU had been trying to challenge the constitutionality of that law, saying that it doesn't comply with the Fourth Amendment. It allows the government to collect categories of persons' emails with no probable cause, including untold number of Americans getting swept up in communications that go overseas. And they actually couldn't even get to the point of discovery. The government was throwing out all sorts of arguments, whether it's the state secrets privilege, which basically says that even if something's unconstitutional because it's secret, it can't be litigated in open court. But what actually ended up happening was they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court dismissed the case for lack of standing, meaning that they didn't ever get to the merits of the case or any evidence. The Supreme Court said that because the ACLU could not prove with a certainty that their clients, who were lawyers and journalists and human rights workers who regularly would be talking to the people who would be targeted under this law, because they couldn't prove with a certainty that they were being spied on, that they didn't have standing to challenge the law. So essentially, it was impossible to challenge, because of course, the government was keeping every single person that they were using under this law a secret. Justice Breyer wrote in his dissent, "Perhaps, despite pouring rain, the streets will remain dry," which was essentially his interpretation of how the Supreme Court ruled. So, we knew it was going on, but the court cases just could not go forward. The other case was an EFF, Freedom of Information Act case. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon had been screaming from the rafters in Congress that there was a secret interpretation of the Patriot Act that would shock every American if they knew how it was being used. And because it was classified, and even though he knew what it said, Senator Wyden could not say it without losing his position in the Senate. And so EFF, the organization I used to work for, sued for this secret interpretation. Just 2 months before Edward Snowden came out, the government not only would they not give us a single word of content of their secret interpretation of what's supposed to be a public law, but they wouldn't even tell us the number of pages they had in their archives that dealt with the secret interpretation. So fast forward 2 months later to Edward Snowden, there are 3 new lawsuits filed by ACLU, EFF, and other organizations. One which our judge has already said that this surveillance is likely unconstitutional. The first time we've actually gotten to a ruling that is on the merits. And in the EFF's FOIA case, after Edward Snowden came out, a judge ordered the government that they had to stop this obfuscation, this basically throwing up a wall and not giving any information out. Since then, the government has been forced to release thousands of pages on their secret interpretations. And one of the most amazing things about Edward Snowden and his revelations is not what we've learned from the leaks themselves, but what the government has been forced to admit now. You know, we have a secret FISA court ruling that some NSA surveillance was unconstitutional. We have 2 more that say that they were violating the privacy rules systematically. That's not my word, that's the judge's word, systematically and continuously for 5 or 6 years, you know, searching their phone database 90% of the time that didn't reach the legal standard that they were supposed to reach. You know, not just like isolated cases of abuses, but just pure abuse across the board. And none of this would have ever happened without Edward Snowden. We have been fighting in court for years, and he really gave the entire American public a gift because now we actually have a chance to turn back some of the surveillance, which we may have known about from whistleblowers like Tom Drake and others for years, but the court system and Congress refused to acknowledge, and now we have that chance.
What Edward Snowden did was a magnificent and extraordinary act of civil disobedience. I recognize that he's standing on my shoulders, that he knew that it would take extraordinary documentation based on all the revelations that myself and others had disclosed, both within channels and to the press, that what had preceded him was insufficient to ignite the critical debate and discussion that had never occurred in the post-9/11 era. And so what he's done is given us a rare opportunity, a truly rare opportunity, those of us who are the governed, to say, do we consent to this activity? And if we don't, what are you going to do about it, we the people? It's that simple. It's in our hands. Anybody read Catch-22, the Joseph Heller novel? See, the government, without our consent, is simply taking away what they believe, okay? What they believe, because they can, without our knowledge. And the argument is, who's going to stop us now? Because remember, even with some of the Edward Snowden disclosures, like the FISA court order, the extraordinary document, it compels Verizon each and every day to turn over every subscriber record it has through their business services entity, based on an FBI affidavit, to turn over all phone records that Verizon has each and every day to NSA. There's no suspicion. There's no probable cause. There's nothing that justifies it except it's an order. It's an order. See, for me, it's really chilling. Who would have imagined that this could happen in this country? Well, there's nothing particularly exceptional about Americans in this regard. History's not kind. You have to go back to go back to the 1930s. And you read Article 48 of the Weimar Republic, okay, and you start looking at the Enabling Act legislation that was actually passed, legalizing under the legislative branch, and then the executive secretly interpreting. Parallels are really disturbing. They truly are. And so we have this extraordinary opportunity in this country to halt the slide. And Edward Snowden has given us that gift. And he was willing to not only escape the country, he was willing to put his life, as well as other whistleblowers, willing to sacrifice, just like Chelsea Manning did, to expose the dark underbelly of foreign policy and military operations overseas. And just like any number of others, some you will never hear of, who've done their part to bring to light what needs to be shown to the public. So we have the opportunity to see just how far those who ostensibly represent us, those who are elected or unelected, have gone, claiming in our name what must fall under national security. And who cares about that other side, the liberty and rights and freedoms and all that? That's just some, old value system. This is the real world. And of course, if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to worry about. Because in this environment, there is no privacy. In this environment, everybody is guilty by definition. If you knew, and I'm writing a book with Jesselyn about this, simply cannot find a publisher after 2 years. No one to this day wants to touch the material. Nobody to this day wants to touch the material. Far more went on in my case than has ever been publicly disclosed. How far the government went to destroy the very people that I used to work with, turn their own lives upside down. But you'll never see that on the front pages. People who have lost their jobs because of me, merely by association, hanging out with the wrong person. What does it come to in this country? And people self-censor. Edward Snowden has clearly given this extraordinary opportunity to open up any number of windows into this dark building called central government. The critical question is, what are we the people going to do about it? I said it yesterday. Franklin, when it's asked, what did you guys create in there? A republic, if you can keep it. There were no guarantees. And I recognize that the vast majority of Americans just want to go about their daily lives and be left alone, to be left alone, to do what they do. Respecting each other, but leave me alone. Government doesn't want to leave you alone, right? It's pathological. And most people don't want to have positions in government. They don't. It's not what most people seek in life. It just isn't. They don't seek power over others. And that's why we had this mechanism that was put into place so as to check all that. Those checks are gone, okay? We're fortunate because of Edward Snowden and a number of others, we're at least having this conversation debate. But it's still back to us, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And however way we want to do that, it's our choice.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for reminding us that while extraordinary people like Edward Snowden, like the whistleblowers that we have with us here today, can provide us with the information about government abuses, it really is up to us for anything to make sure that something is done in response to that information, because there hasn't been reform, and I think that's important to remember. The NSA program it continues, and there hasn't been significant reform for all of the bills that are pending in Congress, for all of the committees that have been formed and the panels that have been formed that have given recommendations. Very little has changed. And so that debate, it's really up to us to keep that debate going and to make sure that change does happen. I want to make sure, I know that we got started late, so I'm not sure if one of the organizers can let me know. Do we have time to take questions from the audience? Are we set up to do that? I'd love to open it up. I know that folks probably have some really interesting conversations for the panelists, so want to make sure that you have that opportunity. Fantastic. So about 10 or 15 more minutes for questions. Does anybody have a question for our panelists here today? I know that, don't be shy. I know you folks there's folks among this group rarely are, so I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions. We've got a number.
My question is, when y'all moving to New Hampshire?
Our panelist is actually from New Hampshire originally, I believe. Is that right? Originally? Don't. Quotation.
So first, since I have this opportunity, I just want to say thank you for all you've done. I think you're incredibly brave. You were brave when you were brave when you engaged in your whistleblowing activities, and continue to be brave now in your defense and what you're doing. My question is, what do you think we should be doing? I mean, I know marching out in the streets, but I've been there, done that. I really want to do something that's going to change things.
A number of different things. First of all, play to your strength, whatever that is. If you're a great writer, write letters to the editor calling out all the bullshit in the media articles. every day from the mainstream media. If you're an artist, do artwork on this. If you're a lawyer, volunteer pro bono on this. Everyone, I know you guys aren't into the government, I get that, but still, you all have Congress people. It matters. Call them. They have to keep track of it each day. Call your Congress, your senators, 2 senators, and House of Representatives, and tell them you support the USA Freedom Act, and you don't want that Dianne Feinstein piece of crap act that she has. It does matter. Hopefully other people that you're more in tune with, like Rand Paul, who had who's done amazing stuff in this area, or even Justin Amash, who had done something to defund the entire NSA surveillance parks, where your money was being used for that. I mean, do pay attention to Congress, because for better or for worse, it's what we have right now. In your personal lives, depending on what you're doing, use encryption or teach yourself. Have crypto parties, learn to use encryption. I don't know how many cypherpunks we have in here, but I know, it's the anarchists and the feminists and the cypherpunks and people who are all of the above, libertarians. But there are so many different things, big and small, that you can do. Trevor can get into specifics on encryption. But meanwhile, be vocal. Please don't be complacent. That has been the biggest problem. We had a Restore the Fourth rally that brought out, some maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. That should be 300,000 or 400,000 people, or even 1 million people. Go to rallies. You don't have to march in the street every day, but when there is a rally, I know you have to hold your nose, but hold your nose and come inside the Beltway. You can stay at my place. And I don't know. Well, I mean,
You'll live to regret that one.
I have a lot of kids, so you guys will probably just blend right in. They're a pretty wild bunch, and they're not shrinking violets about anything. So be active. So many people are still complacent and happy to watch a few other people take the lead, take the hits, when really you can be there right alongside them doing that in whatever way you feel you can most contribute. If you have spare money, contribute it. If you have good writing skills, write those letters. Everyone can pick up the phone and call Congress. It will take about 5 minutes of your life to do that.
So I would second that call to call your congressman. I mean, another consequence of Edward Snowden was that, just a year ago, Congress was trying to reauthorize the Patriot Act and FISA Amendments Act. Nobody would vote against it. I mean, there was a handful of congressmen and senators who did. Everyone ignored all the groups that were trying to raise alarm about this. Now everybody has flipped in Congress. They've seen the polls. They all realize this is an election issue. And so half of Congress has switched positions, and now they're against the NSA, and the other half are on the brink. And so if you could send them over the edge by calling their office, that would be wonderful. The second thing you can do is use technology. No matter what law passes, we won't fix all the problems, and so we need to use technology to help fix the rest, and that's encryption. So you can use Tor, you can use PGP email, you can use OTR chat. If you don't know what any of these acronyms are, Google them. You can also go to our website, pressfreedomfoundation.org. We have a detailed paper you can read that's written in everyday language. It's called Encryption Works, and it tries to walk you through step by step how to set these products up, and so you can teach your friends how to use them too. And so those are the two things that I would recommend.
I am truly inspired by the Free State Project. But you're not just talking about this, you're actually doing it. And for those who are considering moving here, just determine where you are and what is really of value to you going forward for the rest of your life. This really is kind of the epicenter of Americans who are taking sovereignty back into their own hands. So just do it.
All
I just wanted to say, I just wanted to highlight the fact that right here in New Hampshire, as far as New Hampshire representatives are concerned, that there is a difference when it comes to the positions that they're taking on the NSA. And quite frankly, I think that is because they're not hearing enough from their constituents. So Representative Annie Kuster actually voted against an homage amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act to strip funding from the NSA project, while Representative Shea Porter voted for it. So if you happen to be a constituent of Representative Kuster, I would highly recommend that you contact her and let her know that this is an issue that you care about, and that where she really should be thinking about what New Hampshire Live Free or Die really stands for when she takes votes on the NSA project when it comes to surveillance and privacy. Another question?
Okay, one of my internet heroes is Aaron Swartz, and he committed suicide last year. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how important his contribution is to the Liberty movement.
Freedom of the Press Foundation actually adopted one of Aaron's last projects.
Do you want to give it just a little bit of background for people who might not know who Aaron Swartz is?
Sure. So Aaron Swartz was a boy genius. He, since the age of 13 or 14, he was involved in countless projects that have made the internet what it is today. RSS feeds, which millions of people read their news on every day, even if they don't know it, was co-developed by him. He was one of the co-founders of Reddit, which is one of the most popular websites. He helped start Creative Commons, which has used copyright to spread information rather than restrict it. He has been involved in his hands have been in pretty much everything involving freedom of information and open access online. And he tragically committed suicide about a year ago. And one of the last projects he was working on was then called Dead Drop, now called Secure Drop. And what it is basically a whistleblower submission system that sources can contact journalists through online that solves the problem that we have been talking about, which is that there's this giant email trail and phone call trail that the government prosecutors can go to and prosecute sources. And he developed Secure Drop, and it launched actually right after he died at the New Yorker. We ended up adopting the open source project, and we've been updating it and pouring all of our money into it for about 6 months. And now we're going around to media organizations and helping them install it. And we hope that years down the line, people will look at this project as one of Aaron's greatest accomplishments, because it's a problem that we had been trying to solve for half a decade, since WikiLeaks first came onto the scene and showed that you could do this, yet no one else had been able to do it. And I think by the end of the year, we'll have it in about a dozen major media organizations, and it'll continually get easier to use and more secure. And his contributions have just been priceless to both journalism, freedom of information, open access, and just the way we use the internet today.
I would also mention, is this on? I don't know. Is it working? Okay, I would be remiss for not mentioning that Aaron Swartz's suicide, he was under a very heavy-handed federal criminal indictment and prosecution, basically for making JSTOR articles free articles more widely available to the public. And like in Tom Drake's case and all the whistleblower cases, I said earlier that there's a similar thing going on with hacktivists and internet activists like Aaron, and he was being overcharged under the Computer Fraud Abuse Act and CISPA, the Computer Information Privacy, whatever. They always have these interesting names. But the government was seeking 35 years on Aaron, and then after he committed suicide, it said, oh, we would have settled for 3 months. So it's a huge loss. And I think the best way you can serve his memory is by using the technology that he birthed and that other people are continuing to develop. I think that's an amazing legacy that he's left.
I actually just wanted to say thank you to Jesselyn and to Tom, everyone else, of course, too. My brother John is a whistleblower, and John's actually serving time in a federal prison in Loretto, Pennsylvania. Letters that people are sending to him are what keeps him waking up every day and keeps him from submitting, or what do I want to say, succumbing to what the government wants him to do, and that's just to be quiet. They're punishing him for speaking out and writing letters that he's sending outside of the prison. So not only remembering what everyone before him has done, but try to remember those people and their families too. He's a father of 5, and he's missing out on his family growing up. So all those letters and taking time out to call is such a big deal. And I don't think people realize what an effect it could have. So if you could write, and I live in New Hampshire. Yes, his name's John Kiriakou. It's actually his website is easy to remember. It's defendjohnk.com. But I have started writing letters to the senators in New Hampshire and our Congress people to say that, you know, I mean, my God, it is live free or die, and that's what people like Tom and Jesselyn have done for us so that we do have that right. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Jesselyn's going to give us a little bit of background on.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you could come. John Kiriakou is one of the most tragic cases in my life because he is a CIA officer, a former CIA officer, who blew the whistle on the fact that torture by the U.S. was not just some one-off by Lindy England and Charles Grainer being out of control, that it was actually a program. And he had the audacity to reveal that the U.S. government was engaged in waterboarding. John also significantly refused to take torture training offered by the CIA. He spoke publicly about the CIA being engaged in torture, and that's what led to the circumstances of him serving 2.5 years in jail right now. And what I can say without a shadow of a doubt is that if John had actually tortured somebody, he would not be in jail today. And that's frightening. Through the Obama administration's look forward, not backwards policy that granted immunity to all CIA officers who had been involved in rendition, detention, interrogation, and coercive interrogation techniques, which are all euphemisms for kidnapping and torture. So please, we have a John Kiriakou Defense Fund raising money for his family at the Government Accountability Project, whistleblower.org. There's the John K. Facebook page, Defend John K., and a lot of other efforts to support him. He, in fact, has been going through a lot of grief at prison, as just mentioned, for exercising his First Amendment right by writing letters that were published by Fire Dog Lake in a project that I came up with called Letters from Loretto, modeled on Martin Luther King's Letters from a Birmingham Jail. And for simply exercising that right, he has been mistreated, lied to, and threatened with all sorts of horrible things in prison. And every single letter matters, and that for John and for Chelsea, I mean, that is what keeps people going. So please, if you don't know about John's case, just come to whistleblower.org. You can learn more on his Wikipedia page and on the Facebook page. I can't implore you enough. It's such an injustice, and I live with it every day, feeling that this is a whistleblower that I couldn't save from jail.
John Kiriakou is an extraordinary human being. I got to know him very well before he ended up accepting the plea, because it was clear he was going to face a lot more years in prison no doubt, unless he did. He was put under enormous pressures that I was quite familiar with, given my own case. And up until Edward Snowden's disclosure, there's only two people who had actually been prosecuted and indicted for having revealed the two biggest scandals of the Bush administration, namely torture and secret surveillance. And that was John Kiriakou and myself. John Kiriakou is my brother. I used to be a former CIA officer, very familiar with the culture. It takes extraordinary courage to stand up when you're being asked to just follow orders and go along in the name of national security, and he refused to do that. And in public, he was the first former employee of the United States to acknowledge that torture was state-sponsored from the highest levels of the United States government. First one. And for that, he's paid an enormous price. He said it publicly, we're Americans, we're better than that. We don't need to do this. He spoke extraordinarily fluent Arabic. He knew that there's much better ways to deal with those that even we had declared to be threats to national security. You don't have to pull them off. You don't have to send them to black sites. You don't have to torture them. You don't have to have the Guantanamos. You just don't.
Significantly, I would note that Thomas Drake and John Kiriakou blew the whistle on two of the biggest scandals of the Bush administration, namely secret surveillance and torture, and you can see the result.
So I think probably last question or second to last question. I would love to go all night because thank you guys, but we're on the clock. So one here and then one in the back because we don't like to discriminate. You, yeah, all right.
So I think we're being heard, the people. I understand Rand Paul is suing the NSA. My state of Utah is cutting. We're going to try to cut the water. Bluffdale, and I think Maryland is trying to cut the power. Anyway, I've heard that we're getting some backlash from the NSA. Is that accurate? Do you guys have any comments on what the NSA is thinking or what they might do, or if the backlash, if they're gonna, I read an article, they might actually ramp up the spying. Is any of this true? Do you have any comments?
Now they're saying they need to ramp up the spying and they need to make sure to hold on to everything because they're getting sued a lot. Which I thought was an interesting rationale for that. In terms of acts of civil disobedience, I have no idea. I think they're a very retaliatory, petty, wrong, ill-advised, misguided, lying agency. And so it's not beyond the realm of comprehension that they specifically target people. In terms of the Utah data storage facility, someone needs to get a big fat stop work order on that thing because your taxpayer dollars are being spent to build even more of these facilities. In terms of NSA going dark, that has happened before. I think one time it went dark for 3 days. Tom would know more about that. But again, I can't encourage to say, yeah, cut the electricity. I can't advise you to do anything illegal. I can advise everybody to feel free to engage in civil disobedience in whatever creative ways you come up with.
Yeah, so I mean, as long as vast, secret, unaccountable agencies exist, they're always going to be grasping for more power. I mean, we've seen that with the NSA time and again. They were asking for the ability to wiretap all of the United States before 9/11. They were just granted the power after 9/11 because the political capital was there. You know, just before Edward Snowden came out, they were asking for vastly more cybersecurity power, which would allow them to scan all of the internet traffic in the U.S. Much more broadly than they already do. You know, you're going to be hearing in a couple weeks about data retention. They now want the phone companies to hold all this information for them so they can continue to search it instead of having it in their own databases. So the phone companies will have to hold on to this for 5 years, and then who knows what other law enforcement agencies are going to want this information. So as long as they are operating, they're going to be asking for more power. And so it's our job to not only make sure that they don't get that power, but that we can restrict it even more. And this, for the first time in probably 40 years, we actually have that opportunity in the next 6 months. So hopefully we'll be able to see some action.
I have other creative ideas. You know, in my fantasies, I'm like, yeah, someone should just follow Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers around all day. I'd like to know where she goes to get her manicures and what that awful shade is that she dyes her hair. And, you know, don't break any laws, but start posting personal information that you know about some of these leaders who are like, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But, you know, clappers depends undergarments or whatever. Like, you know, there's stuff about these people. I mean, put them on the defensive. And I'm not saying to stalk them or anything. I'm just saying there are creative ways, and you guys are a lot more creative than I am because I've been in lawyer mode for too long. But I'm sure there are much more devious, diabolical, clever, but legal ways you can come up with to make this point.
Look,
Go ahead, Tom.
NSA is beyond reform. I'll just say it here. A lot of people, they're just all tyranny, okay? Look, they were formed the greatest of secrecy under the Truman administration. They're a pure creation of the executive branch. There is no legislation that brought them into being. And they've been breaking the law for many, many decades. Some of us even calculated for what percentage of their existence they've been breaking the law. Because you have to remember, they were given a mandate to collect foreign intelligence. That was their mandate, electronic. And the world's a battlefield now, so their attitude is, we just collect it wherever we can get it. It doesn't matter what the constraints are. This kind of power, this kind of secret power, whether it's NSA, whether it's Department of Homeland Security, whether it's the CIA, is not going to yield willingly, period. And that's what we have to take into consideration as we the people.
Do we have one last question?
Hopefully this is helpful. I was talking to Mr. Drake yesterday about what he thought of how he won as a team. And I heard court of public opinion came up, not just for Mr. Drake, but Aaron Day got attacked. Have anybody heard Aaron Day speak? I've been attacked. Probably some of you in this room have. Can you guys, without letting the enemy know, is it possible to give a general overview of how you can use the court of public opinion? Because I've felt it, I've had it, they've attacked me, my family, a lot of you have. Can you generally speak to that to help the group without giving out specific, because I know you got to be careful, they're listening to your tactics as well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no, I definitely can, because I firmly believe that Tom Drake's case, to win that case, you had to win not only in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And when you're dealing with the government, they have a giant megaphone with endless batteries and endless voices, and that can reach everyone. And every single day you hear the daily deluge of attacks on Snowden, usually the same three that keep getting recycled, but over and over and over again. But with Tom Drake's, I had a strategy, and he ended up getting, within a short period of time, the Rittenhour Prize for truth-telling, even though he was being charged with making false statements. Every time he was mentioned in the news, I had to say, Tom Drake, winner of the Rittenhour Prize for truth-telling, is being accused of making false statements, and you see how this works. And then a long-form investigative article by Jane Mayer, who's among the 5 or so journalists in this country that I actually trust fully, and then a piece on 60 Minutes. And I think those things were critical to really helping completely collapse the criminal case. With John's, where John was also getting a lot of positive media, it was not, John was in a different district than Tom. John was in the most conservative district in the entire nation, in the Eastern District of Virginia, whereas Tom was in Maryland. And in John's case, he had a different set of attorneys, and we were doing the public media campaign, and it was working. John had other considerations, namely being out in time enough that maybe his 1-year-old wouldn't remember that he was away. Maybe he would be able to get back to his family at the earliest possible moment because he has 3 kids under the age of 8 to raise, and his wife Heather is doing that alone. She was also pushed out of the CIA for no reason other than that John was going through this. So for a while they were on food stamps and doing everything they could to hold it together. There are different reasons people plea bargain, and we shouldn't see that as a sign of weakness, but I sort of lost my train of thought with her husband.
Well, so I mean, I'll say that public opinion matters in ways that you think it would and that you wouldn't think it would. Number one, you have to remember when Edward Snowden came out with these disclosures, even in the first couple weeks, Congress didn't really care. They kind of either ignored it or said they knew about it and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't until 3 or 4 weeks later when the opinion polls started coming out that they saw that voters cared, that they all of a sudden did a 180, and now all of a sudden this is one of their most important issues. So by showing your support for Edward Snowden and opposing the NSA, you are likely to change the opinions of the people that matter most in Congress. Number two, you also change the opinions of people who aren't supposed to even pay attention to public opinion in the first place, judges. Multiple judges now in both Freedom of Information Act cases, FISA, secret FISA court judges, and a federal court judge in a case challenging the NSA have pointed to the strong public debate that is going on and how it's healthy for the country, and that's why they are addressing these issues. That's why they're making the orders that they do. So both in the government which represents us and the government which is supposed to oversee those representatives, public opinion is huge.
I'll just say this. I would not be sitting here on this stage in front of you if it wasn't for this extraordinary woman to my left. She was my voice when I had none. She got what was at stake in this country and for myself when no one else did. I consider her also a pioneering post-9/11 whistleblower. She had no one to go to. There was no one to go to when she blew the whistle. And so is it to acknowledge her now because she has dedicated her professional life defending people like myself, John Kiriakou, and others she can't even talk about to this day who have come forward in the public interest, because they know there's far more at stake in this country, right, and just hiding secrets from the public, and the government continue to engage in wrongdoing and illegality. So I just taking a moment here on this stage, in this location, to personally thank Jesselyn Radack for her dedicated service and for having made the difference, and for turning the label of enemy of the state and leaker into a whistleblower who disclosed government wrongdoing and illegality in the interest of the public. Thank you.